My son told me to leave his party. So I smiled, picked up the folder, and walked out. The next morning, he called me 42 times. I had been sitting in the parking lot for 11 minutes before I finally got out of the truck. The building looked nothing like it did when it was a failing print shop. I looked at my calloused hands, the hands that installed the very first solar panels on this roof. Now, Austin Heights was a glass fortress, and I was on the wrong side of the gate. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. I would love to know who is part of our community. The atrium of Austin Heights was a sea of tailored wool and practiced laughter. I moved through the crowd in my retirement slacks and a sport coat that smelled faintly of cedar and age. To everyone else, I was just this stray detail in a perfect picture. To Tyler, I was a ghost. He was standing in the center of a circle of venture capitalists. His dark suit was crisp, and his confidence was a weapon that he had learned to wield with lethal precision. Brittany stood at his side, her smile fixed and bright like a label on an expensive bottle of wine. When Tyler's eyes finally found me, he did not wave, he did not even blink. He looked through me as if I were made of glass. I had been the silent architect of his entire life, the one who swung the hammers and signed the checks, but tonight I was just an uninvited guest at a table I had paid for. I found a seat near the front, my blue manila folder resting heavy on my lap. I wanted to see his face when he spoke. Tyler tapped the microphone and the room went silent. He began a long list of acknowledgements. He thanked his mentors. He thanked his team. He even thanked the city of Austin for its vibrant. Then he leaned in, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. Most of all, he said, I want to thank my mystery benefactor, the one who believed in this dream when the banks laughed at me. Without them, none of this would be real. He looked directly at me then, but there was no gratitude in his eyes, only a dare, a silent command to stay in the shadows. He was crediting a mystery because acknowledging his father would mean admitting he had not done it all on his own. It would ruin the self-made mythos he had spent 4 years constructing. Before I could even process the sting, Brittany was at my side. She did not sit. She leaned down, her fingers firm against my elbow, her voice a sharp hiss. Gary, you need to go. You are making the guests uncomfortable. I am his father. Brittany, I said, my voice clinical. You are an anchor, Gary. You do not fit the brand identity we have built here. She was steering me by the elbow now, her grip tightening. We need Tyler focused on people who actually matter to the company's future. I will have security escort you out the back so there is not a scene. I looked at her. I looked at Tyler, who was already turning his back to me to start a new conversation. There was no sadness, no surge of paternal grief. There was only the cold, sharp click of a balance sheet being settled. I realized I had been the silent investor in their version of family, and my equity had just been liquidated without my consent. I understand completely, I said. I stood up, but I did not move toward the door. Instead, I placed the blue manila folder on the high-top glass table between us. Inside were the records of every cent I had drained from my life to fill theirs. $680,400. Then you definitely will not be needing me to keep covering this, I said, my voice even, and loud enough for the nearby investors to pause. Enjoy your empire, Tyler. It is exactly what you paid for. I did not wait for a response. I walked out through the glass doors, the cold Austin air hitting my face like a reset button. I sat in my truck and watched the blue neon sign of Austin Heights glow in the dark. This was not a breakdown. It was accounting. And the first payment was now overdue. I drove back to the old house in the Texas Hill Country. The silence of the cabin was louder than the engine of my truck. The neon blue of Austin Heights faded in my rearview mirror, replaced by the deep, unforgiving shadows of the oak trees. When I walked into the kitchen, the air still smelled faintly of the peppermint tea my wife, Patricia, used to brew every night before bed. She has been gone for years now, but her absence still felt like a physical weight in the room. I sat at the table and stared at the spot where the blue folder had sat just hours ago. I thought about the math of the last 4 years. It started with $360,000. That was the initial business loan I co-signed when every bank in Austin looked at Tyler's business plan and laughed. I did not hesitate. I put my name next to his because I believed in the son Patricia had raised, but believing turned into bankrolling. In 2020, when his first product launch tanked, I wrote a check for $16,000 to keep the lights on. A month later, it was $24,000 for payroll, then $30,000, then $18,000. Each time he told me it was a loan. Each time I told myself it was an investment in my family. But tonight, the math finally changed. I was not an investor. I was a ghost who wrote checks. I had been living in a prison without bars, a structure built from my own grief and Tyler's entitlement. Looking back, I realized my silence was a survival tactic. Tyler was the only living part of Patricia I had left. He had her quick wit and the way she would squint her eyes when she was thinking hard about a problem. I allowed myself to be used because I was terrified that if I stopped paying, the connection would break. I was buying his presence one installment at a time. I had turned myself into a utility. I was the silent foundation, the guy who drove 3 hours every weekend to help gut the old warehouse and swing a hammer until my shoulders burned. I did the work no one saw, so he could stand in a room full of glass and tell people he was a self-made success. I had normalized his cruelty because it felt easier than admitting I had raised a son who did not value me. I had become the survivor of my own kindness, trapped in a cycle where my only worth was measured by my credit limit. The truth is, my compassion had been a luxury. Tyler had overdrafted for years. I had shrunk my own life wearing the same sport coat for 3 years and driving a truck with 200,000 miles on it just so his empire could stay shiny. I let myself become invisible so he could feel bigger. I thought I was being a good father, a loyal husband to a memory. But as I sat in that dark kitchen, I realized that boundaries are not walls, they are the foundation of respect. And Tyler had no respect for a man he viewed as an automated teller machine. I stood up and poured the tea down the sink. The silence in the house did not feel heavy anymore. It felt like a blank page. The $680,400 was not just the number on a balance sheet. It was the price of my freedom. I had been the silent investor in Tyler's version of family for far too long. Now I was calling in the debt, every single cent of it. The morning did not bring an apology. It brought 42 missed calls and a voicemail that vibrated with the kind of entitlement I had spent too long funding. I sat in my kitchen, the screen of my phone glowing with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I did not call him back. I did not need to hear his voice to know the script. I pressed play on the final voicemail instead. Dad, what is wrong with you? Tyler's voice was tight, bordering on a shout. You walked up to me in front of the people who represent the future of this company and dropped a stack of personal grievances on the table. Do you have any idea what that did to my credibility? The lead investor spent the last hour asking me why my own father is trying to sabotage a $680,400 debt that should not even be public. You are being erratic, Dad. You need help. He was not worried about my heart. He was worried about his valuation. Before the message even finished, my daughter Emily called. Her voice was shaking as she told me to look at LinkedIn. Brittany had spent her morning crafting a masterpiece of corporate gaslighting. She had posted a long, preening thread about protecting the vision from toxic anchors and the difficulty of managing family members with declining mental health issues. She did not name me, but she did not have to. She was painting a picture of a confused, bitter old man who needed a medical evaluation, all to ensure those debt documents looked like the ramblings of a man who had lost his grip. I stared at the screen, and for the first time, I saw the situation for what it really was. This was the trap of normalized cruelty. Tyler did not see himself as ungrateful. He saw me as a utility, a natural resource like sun or wind that he was entitled to harvest for his solar empire. To him, my $360,000 initial investment and the $88,000 in emergency checks were not sacrifices. They were simply features of his business model. He had normalized the extraction of my life force until he truly believed that my only purpose was to serve his ambition. They were not shocked by what they had done at the gala. They were shocked that I had stopped playing the role of the silent foundation. By labeling me as unstable, they were trying to invalidate the balance sheet I had left on that table. They wanted to turn a legal obligation into a clinical problem so they could keep the money without the guilt. I rubbed my eyes, but there was no regret. There was only the cold clinical clarity of a contractor looking at a cracked foundation. I did not answer Tyler's 43rd call. I did not comment on Brittany's post. I simply opened my laptop and sent a single email to my attorney, Gerald. I attached the screenshots of their mental health accusations and the transcripts of the voicemails. They are trying to build a narrative, Gerald, I wrote, so let us give them a different one. One made of signed contracts and notarized checks. This was not a family dispute anymore. It was an audit, and I was going to make sure every single penny of that $680,400 carried its full weight. You think Tyler's behavior is pure arrogance, or is it a calculated form of cruelty? Click that like button if you want to see Gary deliver a professional response that they never saw coming. Sitting across from Gerald in his downtown office was the most grounded I had felt in years. Gerald was methodical, unhurried, and spoke in the plain, dry language of someone who had seen every possible way a family could tear itself apart. He reviewed the screenshots of Brittany's LinkedIn post and the transcripts of Tyler's voicemails with a focused quiet. When he finally set the papers down, he did not look sympathetic. He looked ready. They are playing a dangerous game, Gary, Gerald said. By questioning your mental capacity publicly, they are trying to build a foundation to void these debts, but it is going to backfire. This is clear evidence of bad faith. I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. We did not waste time. The formal demand letter went out that afternoon via certified mail and encrypted email. It was written in that precise, bloodless legal prose that strips away all the emotion and leaves only the bones of the conflict. It detailed the outstanding obligations, the $360,000 initial loan, $88,000 in emergency checks, and $232,400 in unpaid professional labor and accrued interest. It used terms like informal agreements, evidenced by written communication, and requested accounting of funds advanced. It made the total visible and undeniable, $680,400. But I knew a demand letter would not be enough for a man who thought he was a king. Tyler only respected one thing, power. And for the last 6 years, I had handed all of mine to him. It was time to take it back. Love, I realized, had been a subscription I had been paying for, and Tyler had just defaulted on the contract. I want to update my estate documents, I told Gerald. All of them, every single one. Gerald did not look surprised. He pulled out a fresh legal pad. I spent the next hour redrawing the map of my life. I specifically instructed Gerald to perform a full title audit on the ridge. If Tyler saw me as a nuisance, I needed to ensure that my wife's land was still legally protected and held in my name. The house in Greensboro, the home Patricia and I had built, was no longer an automatic birthright for a son who treated me like a nuisance. I restructured everything. Tyler's remaining inheritance, including his half of the house, and my investment portfolio was placed into a conditional trust. The terms were simple and lethal. The trust would only release his share under 2 conditions. First, he had to settle the $680,400 debt to me in full. Second, he had to do it in writing with a notarized acknowledgement that every payment I made was a business loan with the expectation of repayment, not a gift. If he refused, his entire share would be diverted to the Patricia Morse Housing Fund, a charity I was starting to honor my wife's legacy of helping those who actually needed a roof over their heads. As I signed the new documents, I felt a profound shift in my chest. There's something clarifying about putting your boundaries in ink. It takes the pain out of the air, where it can be distorted, and makes it a matter of record. I was not doing this to get rich. or even to hurt him. I was doing it because the version of me that is useful and the version of me that is a father are the same person. Tyler needed to understand that when you overdraft someone's compassion, the account eventually closes. The foundation of Austin Heights was shifting, and for the first time in a long time, I was the one holding the blueprints. Gerald called me 3 days later. His voice was not dry this time. It was heavy. He did not explain over the phone. He just said I needed to see the results of the land title audit for Austin Heights. I drove down in silence the hills of Texas, passing by like a blurred memory. When I walked into his office, a single manila folder sat in the center of his desk. It was not blue. It was a standard institutional tan, but what was inside was lethal. Gary, Gerald said, gesturing to the documents. Tyler did not just ignore your contributions. He tried to erase your ownership of the land itself. He flipped to a sublease agreement for a property we called the Ridge. It was the highest point of the family estate, 30 acres of untouched land, where Patricia and I had planned to build our retirement cabin. We used to sit up there and watch the sunset, talking about the day I would finally hang up my tool belt. Patricia had left that land to Tyler in her will, but with a massive condition. I held the first right of refusal. If he ever wanted to lease it or sell it to a third party, he had to offer it to me first at the original cost. It was her way of making sure I always had a home. But the document in front of me was a sublease to a massive international energy developer. Tyler needed that land to secure a multi-million-dollar buyout. He had not asked me. He had not offered it to me. Instead, there was a signature at the bottom of the page. My signature, I stared at the ink. It was a good imitation. It had the same slight tilt I used when I was in a hurry, but I had not signed a thing. Tyler had forged my name to bypass the environmental and title checks. He had exploited a loophole during the rushed closing of the buyout, using a title company owned by one of his fraternity brothers to look the other way. He thought he could bury the forgery in the mountain of paperwork before I ever found out. He had not just used me as an automated teller machine. He had tried to steal the literal ground Patricia had intended for my peace. I leaned back in the chair, and a cold wave of realization washed over me. This was the silent regret of the Guardian. For years, I had watched Tyler's ego grow like a weed in a garden I refused to tend. I saw the way he started valuing optics over people, the way his language shifted from we to I. I saw it all, but I stayed quiet. I was the guardian of a memory, waiting for an apology that I now realize was never going to come. I had been trapped in the hope that if I just gave him enough space and enough money, he would find his way back to the boy Patricia loved. Instead, I had provided the capital for my own erasure. I had been so busy protecting his future that I did not notice him plotting to dismantle mine. This was not a family misunderstanding anymore. This was criminal forgery and title fraud. The debt was not just $680,400. It was the betrayal of a dead woman's final wish and the theft of my remaining years. Emily called me that night, her voice heavy with tears. She didn't ask me to stop. She just asked if there was any other way. I told her the truth, that Tyler had traded our family's soul for a glass tower. She didn't argue. She simply said, "I love you, Dad," and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to pay for those words. "What do you want to do, Gary?" Gerald asked. I looked at the forged signature one last time. There was no pain left, only the clinical precision of a man who knows exactly how to tear down a structure that is no longer safe to inhabit. "File the criminal report, Gerald," I said, "and make sure the mediation board gets a copy. I am done being the ghost in his machine. It is time he meets the man who actually owns the blueprints." The mediation room was smaller than the atrium at Austin Heights, but the tension was twice as thick. Tyler sat across from me in another tailored suit. His dark hair was perfectly slicked back, while Brittany checked her watch with an expression that said, "My presence was an expensive waste of her afternoon." They still believed this was about a disgruntled father seeking a payout. Tyler leaned forward, his voice practiced and smooth. He told the mediator that the $680,400 were informal familial gifts, a father's contribution to his son's legacy. He was trying to reclassify the loans as gifts to avoid the repayment clauses, conveniently ignoring the tax implications that would eventually haunt him. He actually smiled at me, a condescending look that suggested I should be grateful he was even acknowledging our relation. I did not reach for anger. I reached for the tan folder Gerald had prepared. I slid a copy of the sublease agreement for the Ridge across the polished mahogany table. Tyler's smile did not falter until he saw the highlighted signature at the bottom. Then, the color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a physical injury. Brittany leaned in, her eyes darting across the page, her composure shattering in real time. I let the silence hang for a long, cold minute. I told the room exactly what Gerald had found. I explained the first right of refusal in Patricia's will, the clause Tyler had tried to erase with a forgery. I watched him realize that this was not just a mediation about a debt. It was the opening act of a criminal investigation. His solar energy empire was built on a foundation of fraud, and I held the only keys that could stop the gates from locking him in. "Dad," Tyler whispered. The CEO persona was gone. He looked like the boy who used to lie about his grades, small and desperate. "If you file this, the buyout is dead. The investors will pull out. We will lose everything. The house, the company, our reputation. Please, we are family." Brittany's hand moved toward my arm. Her voice was suddenly soft and pleading. "Gary, think about what this will do to Tyler's future. You have always been so supportive. Do not do this to us." I looked at my son for 3 full seconds, exactly like I had at the gala. I saw the fear in his eyes, but I also saw the entitlement that still had not fully left him. He was not sorry for the betrayal. He was sorry he had lost his leverage. I stood up and handed him a copy of my new will. "I did not do this to you, Tyler," I said, my voice clinical and final. "You built a world where you were the only person who mattered, and you used my silence to pay the bills. I'm just finally making sure the weight of your choices is real. The debt is $680,400. The Ridge is no longer yours to lease. And the father you thought was a resource has finally become a person." I walked out of the room without looking back. The door clicked shut, a sharp, decisive sound that echoed through the hallway, like the final period on a very long, very expensive sentence. Tyler signed the papers. There were no more speeches about mystery benefactors or corporate visions. There was only the quiet, scratching sound of a pen, acknowledging a debt that should have been paid in respect long before it was measured in dollars. He committed to a strict repayment plan for the full $680,400. The board of directors, terrified of the fraud charges going public, forced Tyler to liquidate his personal stock options to settle the debt. It was a humiliating private restructuring that stripped him of his majority control. He also began the therapy. We both knew he needed learning to see the world as something other than a set of resources to be mined. Brittany's social media posts about toxic anchors went silent. 6 months later, she filed for divorce and rebranded herself as a corporate turnaround expert, distancing herself from Tyler's legal scandal as quickly as she had once embraced his success. I did not stay to watch them rebuild. I had my own blueprints to follow. I took the Ridge, the land Tyler had tried to steal, and I sold it to a nonprofit dedicated to affordable senior living. We broke ground recently on the Patricia Moore's housing project. It is a place for people who have worked their whole lives and deserve to spend their final years in dignity, not in the shadows of someone else's success. Every time I walk the site and talk to the architects, I feel Patricia there with me. Not as a memory I have to buy, but as a partner in a legacy that finally means something. I moved out to a small, quiet ranch in the Texas Hill Country. The air is clear, the oak trees are ancient, and my service truck looks just fine, parked in a driveway that I own outright. Emily visits every other Sunday. We do not talk about valuations or solar empires. We talk about the garden and the way the light hits the hills at dusk. I have come to realize that the hardest part of this journey was not getting the money back. It was realizing that I had taught my son to treat me like a footnote. We think we are being good parents by shrinking ourselves, by making our sacrifices invisible so our children can stand taller. But when you stop being a person and start being a utility, you kill the very respect they owe you. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that boundaries are not walls. They are the foundation of a healthy life. You do not have to be a ghost in your own home. Forgiveness is not always for the other person. Sometimes it is the only way to set yourself free from the prison of being useful. Stop shrinking, reclaim your space. If Gary's journey reminded you that your worth is non-negotiable, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice and reclaiming the self. Remember, your value is not based on what you give, but on who you are.